Dufferin-Caledon. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome to Ghosts of Dufferin County and Beyond Special Edition. I'm your host, Marianne Kennedy, and today I have a really exciting interview for you. I am going to be sitting with author and hypnotist Robert Schwartz. Rob has 3 books. He has Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. Rob, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be with you.
You bet. I wanted to start off by asking you, of the 3 books that I just talked about, what are your books about?
The premise of all 3 books is that we plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we're born, before we come into body. And the books focus specifically on the pre-birth planning of big, common life challenges. Pretty much anything you can think of that is a common challenge, it's in one of the 3 books. The intentions are to help people awaken, help people heal, and help people see the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose of their biggest challenges, which I believe is a large part of the healing.
Excellent. It's fascinating. How did you come to writing these books?
Well, believe it or not, I was actually in the corporate world for a number of years, self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant. And then way back in 2003, 3 very important things happened all within a few weeks of each other. One was that I was really unhappy in this corporate work that I was doing, and I was casting about trying to figure out what else I might do with my life that would be more fulfilling. And almost out of desperation, really, and I hesitate to phrase it that way to you, but I went to see a psychic medium, which is something I had never done before. And I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but nothing else was providing any insight. So I go into this session with the medium, and right away she says to me, "Your spirit guides are here." And I said, "What is a spirit guide?" I mean, I never even heard the term before. So she explained that, and then she said, "Your guides would like to speak directly with you," and she started to channel them. The first thing they said right out of the box was, "You planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born." And I just shook my head, and I said, "Well, why in the world would I have done that?" And that caused them to launch into this very lengthy and detailed monologue in which they answered that question. But what was really impressive about their answer is that they discussed in detail why I had planned my particular challenges. And they knew what every single one of them was without me telling them anything, nor had I told the medium anything prior to the session. So as you can imagine, if you're talking to beings who know literally everything about you without you saying anything, it gives them a fair amount of credibility. So this blew my mind wide open. And in the days and weeks after that session, I thought about this idea constantly. And what it did for me really is that it created quite a deep healing, because it allowed me to see for the first time deeper meaning and deeper purpose to my own personal challenges. And then I thought, well, if this perspective can create this kind of healing for me, then surely I can do the same for others. That was when I first started to think about writing the book on the subject. Then within just a very short time of the session with the medium, I was introduced to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her higher self, her soul. So I had the opportunity to speak with her soul for about 15 hours over 5 sessions. And her higher self told me in detail how pre-birth planning works. And that 15 hours of channeled material really served as the foundation for all 3 books I went on to write. And then the third thing that happened at that same time, and this was really the most impactful by far, I had a spiritually transformative experience in which I was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk in the middle of a weekday afternoon. And I had this experience in which all of a sudden, every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person would arise within me. And, I call it unconditional love, but those are the words that get closest to it in the English language, but they really don't even begin to touch it. This was a divine love, a transcendent love. It's really beyond words. The experience lasted only for about an hour, but it changed everything I understand about who I am, who everybody else is, the nature of the soul, the nature of the universe, why we're here. What I learned in that experience, what I was caused to know, basically, is that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. So the combination of those three things got me to say, okay, I'm going to leave the corporate world and attempt to write a book on this subject. And then 3 years later, Your Soul's Plan came out.
That's fantastic. And what a brilliant story, which leads me to a couple of questions. Since that experience you had with the first medium you sat with, where you had sort of a vicarious experience where she might have been channeling information from beings connected to you, since then, have you been able to have had direct experiences yourself?
I myself, I don't consider myself to be a medium or a channel. Now, having said that, I am aware that I'm guided just as we all are. And particularly when I'm writing, I really get into a zone and I feel like there's a team around me. And every now and then something will happen that lets me know in a more concrete way that the team is there. For example, a certain visual image will just suddenly appear in my mind's eye. It has the feeling of something that I created in my own imagination, but I can tell, I don't know quite how to put it in words. I can tell that it's coming from a source other than myself. Mm-hmm. And so particularly when I write, I'm aware that they're there helping me.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of your hypnosis work, is that what the purpose of that part of your life is, to bring people into their own direct experiences?
Yeah, very much so. So basically what happened is after Your Soul's Plan came out, which if I remember correctly, was in early 2007, all of a sudden people all over the world started writing to me and they were all saying the same thing. They said, I want to know what my pre-birth plan is. Mm-hmm. And for a period of years, I responded to every email that said that with exactly the same answer. I said, look, I'm not a medium. I'm not a channel. I don't know what your pre-birth plan is. If you want to know that, work with one of the mediums who's in Your Soul's Plan. But then I learned about the work of Michael Newton, the Between Lives regression, which we can talk about as we go on. And then I realized, this is a way that I can facilitate a process in which people can discover their pre-birth plan on their own. They can talk directly with Spirit, their Council of Elders, and ask any question they have about their pre-birth plan or how they're doing in terms of fulfilling it. That's why I trained to offer that kind of hypnosis. And that's what the purpose of the session is.
Yes, it's excellent. It's a familiar scenario. I remember when my first book was published in 2015, same situation, emails from everywhere across the world asking the same questions, which then birthed the second book. And so, I'm familiar with that process for sure. I want to go back for a sec to pre-birth planning. For our viewers at home that may not be familiar with what that is, can you explain that?
So the process, as I understand it, and much of what I'm about to share now comes from channeling sessions with Jesus through one of the channels who are on the team. What he has explained to me is that the personality that is going to incarnate in the physical body is a portion of the soul's energy. And the way the pre-birth plan comes about is that it's created by the soul, by the higher self, in consultation with spirit guides, angels, masters, and God or source, or whatever term you would like to use. And then the personality is created by the soul, and the personality is informed of what the life plan is. At that point, the vast, vast majority of personalities say, this sounds great, and then they incarnate. But there are a very small percentage who, when they're informed of the plan, they start to experience human emotions like fear and doubt. If you express fear or doubt that perhaps the plan is a little bit too ambitious, then you are reassured by your guides, by your higher self, that this plan is for your highest good and everybody else's highest good. And this reassurance is offered with such unconditional love that people sense intuitively that it is for their highest good. And then the vast majority who express fear or doubt say, okay, I'm fine with the plan now, and then they incarnate. But there's a small percentage of the small percentage who express fear or doubt, who continue to express fear or doubt. And if you do that, then the plan will be amended until it's acceptable to you. So bottom line, everyone has agreed to what they're going to experience. Nobody is forced to do anything against their will.
So from your understanding, would you say it would be fair to say then that in the pre-birth planning process, we are the ultimate pilots, not sort of a council of other folks, but us ourselves?
I think that you could put it that way, but there's a lot of variability, as I understand it, depending upon the age of the soul and the experience the personality has incarnating on the earth plane. So what Michael Newton found out when he researched his books, which I believe was back in the 1990s, souls who are young and relatively inexperienced on the earth plane, they tend to rely much more heavily on the advice of their council of elders and essentially will take their recommendations without question for the most part. Mm-hmm. A soul or a personality who is older, much more experienced with lifetimes on earth, they feel much better qualified to make their own decisions, and they would be more likely to say to the council, can we change this? Can we amend that? They have a much more active role in the process.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting combination of viewpoints and possibilities there, because we're talking about an individual, so a part of a soul that is choosing the incarnation to a large degree, and that would be for that soul's individual sort of growth and experience overall. But then we also have another group of beings who must have more than just the insight of that one individual soul's progression. Moreover, really like connecting to overall evolution of souls incarnating. It seems there's a view for the individual and a view for the whole. Would you say that sounds accurate?
That is accurate. And what I've seen in the research for my 3 books is that every pre-birth plan, without exception, is designed to be for the highest good, not just of the individual incarnating, but the highest good of all beings everywhere.
That's right, yeah. And then I want to just backtrack a quick second, because you had mentioned that you had interaction with Jesus. Can we elaborate on that? Can you illustrate for us your understanding of Jesus as a being? And what I'm really kind of getting at here is, in your experience with this communication, is it your understanding that Jesus to you presents as an all singular Christ, or is he an avatar, as are many other souls that have incarnated and those who have not incarnated?
I think that both of those things are true, and which one you're going to get depends upon which channel you're working with. Mm-hmm. So the consciousness of Jesus is so highly evolved and so immense, so expansive, that you could find a channel who's channeling, let's say, most of that consciousness, and it's at a higher level. And then you have channels who are channeling more what we might call the personality of Jesus. It's sort of along a spectrum. But the level of wisdom and the intensity of love that come through in every word he says is really extraordinary. And of the many, many mediums and channels I've worked with in researching my 3 books, when I have a personal question or issue of any kind and I want guidance from a higher source, I go to Jesus and we talk things over.
Okay. And in your personal life, prior to this work, did you have religious subscription in any way?
Not really. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family. There was no conversation of Jesus whatsoever. And I think most of the people in my family have not read my book, so they probably don't even know that Jesus plays a big role in them. But if they were to find out about that, I think it would be mind-blowing for them, that probably they would not understand it, and probably they would have some judgments about it.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. It's another thing we have in common. How wonderful. Going back to pre-birth plans, you talked about common challenges. I'm going to talk about challenges in a second, but what I want to know is, what are some sort of common examples of what we do plan within a life, and then that'll lead me into free will afterward. But what are some examples of things that we plan ahead of time?
Well, among the three books, we talk about the pre-birth planning of physical illness, mental illness, miscarriage, abortion, alcoholism, drug addiction, poverty, abusive relationships, the death of a loved one. As I said earlier, it's pretty much every major common kind of life challenge is in one of the three books somewhere. Your Soul's Plan is the first book in the series, and that has really the introductory information in it. Your Soul's Gift is the second book. That book goes into much greater depth in detail about certain challenges. And then the third book, Your Soul's Love, is specifically about the pre-birth planning of challenges specific to romantic relationships.
Why do you think we plan challenges in our lives?
Well, there are five main reasons. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about any one of them, but let me rattle these off and then we can explore them as you like. The five main reasons are balancing and releasing karma, healing, service to others, experiencing contrast, which means experiencing what we might call not love. And the last reason is healing or correcting false beliefs or false feelings about oneself. I'll also add this. A lot of the motivation on the soul level for planning pre-birth challenges has to do with cultivating qualities that are important to the soul that I refer to as divine virtues. These are qualities like unconditional love, compassion, empathy, patience, faith, trust, and so on. I think I've got a list of about 28 or 29 now that come up the most frequently. From a pre-birth planning perspective, you view your challenges as offering both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate the divine virtues. And the virtues fall under the third reason I mentioned, service to others. The connection there is that as you cultivate a divine virtue, you raise your vibration. Your vibration, as I'm sure you know, is your primary form of service to humanity, regardless of what your mission might be in the physical world. Your vibration is always your primary form of service to others. And so as you raise your vibration by cultivating the virtues, that allows you to be of service to the entire planet.
Fascinating and fantastic. Can you elaborate on karmic balancing as perhaps one of the reasons we choose challenges in a life?
Well, to start, there's an important distinction to be aware of in that karmic balancing and karmic releasing are two very different things. Balancing karma means you plan, presumably in a new lifetime, to have a new experience that energetically offsets an experience in a previous lifetime. Releasing karma means you heal the underlying tendency that created the karma in the first place. In other words, if all you do is balance karma without also releasing it, you'll end up recreating the same karma over and over again. The example I like to give to explain balancing karma, let's say the two people had a past life together in which one was ill and the other was the caregiver. When those two people transition back into spirit at the end of that incarnation, they'll have a life review, as we all do. They'll see this caregiving relationship portrayed in the life review. And when they see it, they may or may not have a feeling of completion in regard to that caregiving relationship. Now, if they feel complete with that experience, then as I understand it, there is no karma, and they'll go on to plan something completely new. But if for some reason one or both of these people feel incomplete with that caregiving relationship, the feeling of incompletion is the karma. So let's say they feel that way. How could they then balance the karma? Well, most likely they're going to trade places. The one who was ill will plan to be a caregiver. The one who was the caregiver will plan to have an illness of some kind.
Yeah, that's fascinating and fantastic. Which it leads me to think about a couple of things. Sometimes folks can get caught up in the idea that we're here to learn if we talk about overall purpose. But, my experience with spirit is more along the lines of we're here to experience, not so much, we don't necessarily have to process learning here. And the way that it's always been sort of described to me is that we have opportunities in the spirit world to also process and integrate. So where we don't finish perhaps a sense of completion or integration of learning from an experience, especially a challenging one that we've had here. And a lot of people, given the work that I do as a medium, a lot of people leave this incarnation without having to do that, and they take a lot of harsh feelings with them when they make their departure. But we do have opportunities on the other side in the spirit world to sort of make things right within ourselves. And so I always say to folks, especially students of mediumship and other metaphysical practices that I teach, I always say, don't get hard on yourself. If you've identified a learning opportunity, that's great. If you're really struggling for the integration and want to keep going with it, do it. But don't feel like you have this timeline, like you've got to get this done in this life, because I feel like this places a pressure on folks to sometimes prematurely and inauthentically get to a place of healing that's really not genuine. And so I always like to say, even the premise of having to do that is this idea that a life is finite, so that when we're done here, we must have completed everything we needed to. But in fact, it's not true. And I really love what you're saying, because it also supports, my understanding of this is through direct experience with spirit, also through lots of hypnosis sessions. But it's interesting hearing your perspective, because you're saying something similar at the same time, which then leads me to free will choice. How does free will choice play into this?
As I understand it, there's a very elaborate, intricate, and elegant intersection between pre-birth planning and free will. One of the mediums I work with, when she goes into somebody's pre-birth planning session, she reports that spirit shows her something that looks in her mind's eye like an incredibly vast and intricate flow chart. Well, what is a flow chart? It's a series of decision points. If you do A, then X happens. If you do B, then Y happens. The flow chart that spirit shows her is so vast and intricate, it's really beyond human comprehension. And what spirit explained to us is that this flow chart represents the soul having taken into account the free will decisions that might be made by the personality. So essentially what's happening is when your soul puts a pre-birth plan in place, it's a framework around which the life is going to happen. But within that framework, you have free will. And so you can go left, you can go right, you can go straight ahead. Your soul wants you to have free will. That's the only way true learning can occur. Otherwise, we would just be automatons. And so this flow chart shows that the soul takes free will decisions into account when planning the potentials for the upcoming lifetime. And potentials is the key word here. There's very little that is set in stone in terms of pre-birth planning. Almost everything is a potential of one kind or another.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. I could almost take your words verbatim. And when I'm working with folks in either Akashic Records work or psychic work, I'm always talking about the field of potentiality and how very little that I experience in my position is ever really written in stone. Very, very few things, and even the ones that are the pathway to them is always optional. So it's really, I would say, rarely, if ever, is it a sort of direct line as only one singular possibility to arrive at a certain point. Certainly there has been, but for the most part, there are optional choices all along the way. So that's excellent. It's excellent. So what we've done, Rob, is we have taken questions from viewers of Ghosts of Dufferin County and beyond. And they're really fascinating. And I've sort of compiled the most interesting ones. And I just want to bring them to you. Okay, so we're ready to get started with that part of today's special episode. So this is one of my favorites. Do spirits of animals evolve and incarnate into human form at some point? In other words, was I an animal in a previous life?
The first thing I want to say about that is that we do pre-birth planning with our future pets. And in my second book, Your Soul's Gift, there's an entire chapter about pre-birth planning with pets. It's a very poignant story of a woman who plans for reasons of her own to be a dwarf in this lifetime. I think she's 4 feet 8 inches tall. And having put that plan into place, her guides then say to her in the pre-birth planning session, this is going to be very difficult, especially when you're a child. You will be so much smaller than the other children. They're going to tease you brutally. They're going to ostracize you. We need to put supports in place to get you through this very difficult experience. And so the plan they then come up with is that she will be surrounded by unconditionally loving pets who will support her through it. And then these future pets come into the pre-birth planning session. There are cats, dogs, a future horse. There's a rooster whose name is Crooked Beak. And they come into the pre-birth planning session and they speak with great intelligence about how they are going to love her unconditionally through this experience of being a dwarf. And in fact, that's exactly how it played out. She was teased mercilessly at school when she was little. She would come home in tears. And then she was fortunate in that she had the ability to talk to the pets telepathically. So her horse, for example, would speak to her mind and say, hey, jump on my back and let's go for a ride. And they just loved her through the experience. Now, coming back to the original question, one of the stories in Your Soul's Love is about a woman who plans, for reasons of her own, to be single almost all of this lifetime. And she's now in her 60s. And she had a past life as a Native American in which there were two other souls who were her children in that lifetime. They wanted to be with her in the current lifetime. Because of her pre-birth plan to be single, they couldn't be her children this time around. And so they actually came in as pets. They both came in as dogs. She's a shamanic healer in this incarnation. And the dogs actually played a role in the private sessions she did in offering healings to people. So there's an example of beings who were human in a past life, chose to come in as animals in this lifetime. I have not researched whether the reverse occurs. I imagine it's possible, but I haven't looked at it.
That's good. It's fascinating, which sort of brings us to our next question, which is actually from a different viewer, but it is still animal themed nonetheless. And I think you've kind of answered it, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit. How common is it, or how often do our pets incarnate with us?
You know, the only story I really researched in depth was the one I just shared with you. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question, but if I had to go based upon what I heard in the channeling sessions for that one chapter, I would say that they're incarnating with us probably again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. And my experience suggests the same. I remember a number of years ago in Between Lives regression, my horse at the time, funny, I also have horses. My horse at the time in my hypnosis session appeared very, very clearly with me, in fact, on the other side in my soul memories of what I was doing. And that was one of many experiences where I encountered him in the spirit world as well, or in my soul memories. So I really do believe that myself. And then, you know, we can ask a similar question. We know that, you know, many of us have folks in our lives, family or otherwise, that we feel there's a soul recognition there. You know, it could be a total stranger that you're meeting in the street, or you may be at a workshop with someone and feel like, geez, I feel like I've known you forever, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours. You know, what would be an indication to someone that they may have had a past life experience, or they may be part of a group together, which we can talk about shortly as well? What might be an indication for someone that they're meeting someone, even if it's for the first time in this life, not for the first time overall?
Well, it's pretty much what you just described. There's often a feeling of, I know this person, even though they have no idea how they know that person, and they're sure that they haven't met them yet in this incarnation. But there's a knowing, there's a feeling of comfort, there's a feeling of familiarity. Something interesting that Michael Newton found when he was researching Between Lives, people practiced before incarnation how they were going to recognize each other. So for example, he shares a story of two souls who were planning to be husband and wife, and they were trying to figure out, how are we going to recognize each other when we meet? And there was a plan put in place for a woman to wear a certain kind of polka dot dress so that he would recognize it. There was another couple where she was going to be carrying some particular color of umbrella, and he would recognize the umbrella. That kind of thing is planned so that we'll be able to recognize each other.
That's fascinating. How, Rob, would you describe what a soul group is?
A soul group, as I understand it, is a collection of souls who are at more or less the same evolutionary stage, which is another way of saying at more or less the same vibration. And the members of a soul group take turns playing every possible role for each other in many, many different lifetimes. So you and the members of your soul group will be husband and wife, mother and daughter, father and son, brother and sister, best friends, mortal enemies, teacher and student, even murderer, and the one who is murdered. And at the soul level, there's no judgment about any of those roles, including murderer. They're all viewed as opportunities for learning and healing and expansion.
And it's fascinating to discuss that, because it sort of goes back to that one magnificent experience you had that day, where everyone you viewed, you were able to connect with them in a divinely loving way, and to be able to see past the damage and past the personality into the innate quality or essence of their soul. Because if it's true then that we all occupy these vehicles within our soul group's incarnation so that we can deliver experiences to both ourselves and the people in our group, you know, all of our personalities take on all kinds of contexts, and they're imbued with all kinds of sometimes lower energy experiences. But if we can think of all of us, whether they're part of your soul group or not, beyond the personality states, really we're made of all the same thing, which is this, you know, concept of love, but it's beyond description. But in the most basic form, we're made of this power and this love and this intelligence beyond the personalities of everyone. So if we can sort of harness some of that viewpoint a little more often, we find ourselves raising our own vibration, because we're occupying a new consciousness there to be able to become the essence of what that really is, to understand that. So that's beautiful. So here's an interesting question that came in. You know, if we can incarnate with folks in our soul group, and then other times folks have questions as to whether or not someone is in their soul group, or they just have a contract between each other, and it may be fleeting, it may be brief, it may be very long within a life, but the sense is that the person on the other end of the experience may not be a part of the group. In my own experience over years, I have encountered souls where I have a very acute understanding that they are sort of floaters, and they belong in different groups and sort of pods all at the same time. They don't exclusively sort of occupy a relationship circle in the spirit world. What's your understanding of that?
You know, I haven't encountered anything about floaters specifically. My understanding is that for the most part, the vast majority of significant people in your life will be members of your soul group. But when you're putting the pre-birth plan in place, you know, depending upon what it is you'd like to accomplish, you might need somebody who has an expertise or an experience that nobody else in your group really has. And so then you seek out somebody in a soul group who can offer that to you.
Yes. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And so a really common question from folks who are first learning about pre-birth plans and the journey of souls and what it might mean to exist beyond form. One of the questions that they have are often, you know, what is this spiritual amnesia? You know, why don't we remember the plan? What goes on there? What's your understanding of that?
Well, I think there are several reasons for what people call the veil of amnesia. One is that, you know, if you remembered everything about your identity as a soul, your life on the other side, and your pre-birth plan, you really wouldn't have any questions about your life. And if you don't have any questions, then you're really deprived of a lot of learning, because in the Earth School, a lot of learning comes through the process of generating questions, deciding which ones are important enough to try to answer, because you don't have time to try to answer all of them, and then actually having the experience of going out and looking for the answers. A lot of growth and learning comes through that, and you'd be deprived of that if you had no questions. And then, you know, I think another factor there is that if you didn't have the veil of amnesia, you would be acutely aware of the fact that, as Shakespeare said, life is really nothing more than a play on a stage. If you were very much aware of that fact, it would have the tendency to diffuse the intensity of the emotions you experience. In other words, because everything seems so real and so serious, and we, for the most part, don't know that it's a play on a stage, the emotions we feel in response to life are very intense. And I think a lot of the growth and learning in the Earth School comes from feeling intense emotions, and in particular, learning to relate skillfully to them. So without the veil, it would diffuse the intensity of the emotions we feel, and then we'd be deprived of even more learning.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will endeavor to describe the feeling on this ship.
The American ship is just trailing the Blue Nose.
Angus should never have agreed to this last race. She's too old.
Eddie!
Coming in there! The guns are hanging, Mac! Get to it, Mac!
Appears there's some kind of difficulty.
Seems to be something loose up there, I believe.
The console's foul!
I can't see a man.
Just once more, little girl, and you can rest.
She's holding her lead. Yet again.
Her last race and still undefeated, the Blue Nose out of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia was fastest in the world for almost 20 years.
Your mouth can do a lot of amazing things. And your mouth can save a life.
Hi, I'm Tom Wong. I'm just one of close to 1,000 Canadians in search of a stem cell match. We need your help.
A simple swab is all you need to register on the National Stem Cell Database. You could be the one to save a life. Find the hero in you.
This is Rogers TV. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
In your work, Rob, what have you discovered are some things that we do in the spirit world?
Oh, there are all kinds of things. You know, when I lead online workshops, we do a group between lives regression. And when I get the group in front of their council of elders, I prompt them to ask this very long and extensive series of questions that covers all the major areas of their life. One of the questions I prompt people to ask their council of elders is, what is my role on the other side? And the answers they get are absolutely mind-blowing. They're all over the place, and they're not things, for the most part, that you would expect. I'll give you a couple of personal examples. My maternal grandfather, since he has crossed over, I've spoken to him, and I asked him, what do you do on the other side? Well, when he was here, he owned a retail furniture store. On the other side, he's a scientist who researches the properties of water. I would never have guessed that in a million years. And I have an uncle on my father's side of the family who, when he was here in body, his only interest, and I mean literally his only interest in life, was going to the racetrack and betting on the horses. He had no desire to explore any other aspect of life. I've spoken to him since he crossed over, and I said, what is your role on the other side? He said, I'm an intergalactic explorer. So the exact opposite of who he was in this lifetime. When I asked, what do I do on the other side? Now, here was something that is very much in line with what I'm doing in this incarnation. Apparently, I'm a counselor with an expertise in advising souls when they have to make a big decision at a very important inflection point in their evolution. And if you think about what a between lives soul regression does, That's essentially what it's doing. It's helping people make very important decisions at inflection points in their life.
That's fascinating. I love how each sort of answer is segueing into a next question. One of our viewers asked if we can incarnate into beings on other planets. What's your understanding of that?
My understanding is not only can we, but pretty much everybody is doing that. So it's not the case for the average person that you're just going from earthly lifetime to earthly lifetime. In between the earthly lifetimes, you're doing all kinds of different things, one of which would be incarnating as what we would call an extraterrestrial in an extraterrestrial civilization. And that's just another physical lifetime. Then you have non-physical lifetimes. You have entire dimensions that are strictly experiences in emotions. There are other dimensions that are strictly experiences in thought. There are places you go, planets and temples of healing, places to explore color, but pretty much anything you can think of, it's out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. We have another viewer that asked the question, and of course, I think we can discover the answer fairly easily. However, her question was, do we meet our previously departed loved ones on the other side when we transition out of this life?
My understanding that pretty much everybody does, unless there would be some compelling reason that you would not want to. And then people always ask the question, well, what if my beloved has reincarnated? Then how can they greet me when I cross over? As I understand it, consciousness is non-local in nature. So your loved one can be in more than one place at once. They can have reincarnated and still have a portion of their energy back on the other side to greet you when you cross over.
That's right. Yes. Good. Another fantastic question that I thought, it's interesting, and I have my own thoughts on this, but I'd be interested to hear what you say based on your research. One of our viewers asked, do we still reincarnate if the lineage that we are currently in stops? So if no one in the family had any offspring, is this somehow significant?
I have not examined that specific question, but I can't think offhand of any reason why you couldn't do that if you wanted to.
Which sort of brings about another question. And also, again, I have my own experiences and thoughts on this. But the question, really, I think the bigger question being asked here is, when we continue to incarnate in subsequent lifetimes, are we genetically related to our prior incarnations?
I've actually seen that in my workshop. I had a case of two sisters in this lifetime. They did a group between lives regression in one of the workshops. And what was interesting, so the between lives regression has an abbreviated past life regression at the beginning. And in the past life portion of the between lives regression, these two sisters went back to exactly the same past life in which they were in a family together then as well. It was about 5 generations back. It was in England. And what was really interesting about this is that they both saw all the same things. They saw the same mansion that they were living in. They saw the same family members, the same furniture, the same grounds around the house. And they determined that they were their own great grandparents in that lifetime. Then they came out of the experience and said to each other, so what happened? Did you experience anything? And you can imagine their amazement when they found out they'd both gone back to the same past life together.
That's absolutely fascinating and incredible. And I think that it's a great way to demonstrate the reality that there are no, hard and fast rules. There are no concrete, always, all the time, this is how it occurs. I think we can be genetically related to prior lives of our own, and we also cannot be. I think it can go either way. And it sounds like probably you have a similar experience.
I think so.
What would be sort of, if we talk about pre-birth planning and we talk about challenges that we plan to experience, what are some of the most common experiences with struggle that you've sort of identified people having in your hypnosis work? And then if I could do a sort of second part of that question, it would be, how has, in your experience, what someone has learned or experienced through either a past life regression or life between lives regression, what have they learned through that helped them through the experience now?
So in terms of what they've learned that helps them through the experience now, what they learn are the underlying lessons, the reason, the purpose for having planned the challenge. So what's the benefit of that? Well, the first thing it does is that if you're in victim consciousness, it will pull you out of victim consciousness, because obviously if you believe you planned it, then you can no longer see yourself as a victim. That in and of itself is a monumental leap in consciousness. Victim consciousness, as I understand it, is literally the lowest vibration a human being can be at. And it tends to be self-perpetuating, because when you believe that you're a victim, you vibrate at the frequency of victim. And when you vibrate at the frequency of victim, you are energetically stating to the universe that you're a victim. Well, whatever energetic statement you make to the universe, it always responds in the same way. It always responds by saying, yes, that's right, you are. So if you state energetically to the universe that you're a victim, it says, yes, you are, and it brings you more experiences that seem on the surface to confirm to you that you are, in fact, a victim. The way to break out of that negative self-perpetuating cycle is to understand that you planned the experience. And then if you take it a step further and you discover why you planned the experience, which is the whole focus of my workshops and the private sessions, then you can go about learning those underlying lessons in a much more conscious and much less painful manner. In terms of the most common lessons that people are learning, there are many, many permutations of lessons that we learn here in the Earth School. But what I really want your audience to know is that they all have a common denominator. If you distill all of the lessons down, the common denominator is that we're learning how to more freely and fully give and receive love. That's the bottom line reason why we're all here.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. It's interesting too, because if we're talking about, it's good, and I'm hoping that our viewers at home are really going to, have a think to yourself, where are you vibrating at, right? If we talk about a scale of consciousness, I mean, we don't have to assign metric values, even words, but how are you feeling today, right? And then it's interesting too, because some of the most healing experiences folks that I've worked with, including myself a number of years ago, have had in hypnosis, really relates to fear of death and finality, right? So if we have all these challenges that are especially health-related challenges, et cetera, if we boil them down, we are dealing with a fear of loss of purpose, which goes along with loss of life at the same time. And so it's fascinating to our viewers at home to consider having experiences like this so that you could experience your, true reality and universal truth beyond your immediate experience, to help us to sort of solidify the belief, if that's the stage that you may be in, that we are more than this incarnation, that there's more to come beyond this life, and that, a death in this life is birth in our other life, and coming into an incarnation is almost like a death in some ways on the other side, as we are birthed into this life. Would you say so, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. My understanding is that when somebody leaves the physical body and returns to the non-physical realm, those on the other side who know them and love them, there's a big celebration. It's graduation day. It's homecoming day.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. What would you say, is the overarching message of the work that you do?
I think the overarching message of the work I do is that you, everybody, every single person on the face of the planet is a vast, multidimensional, love-filled, light-filled, magnificent being. You are all so much more than you probably know. And I think one of the bottom line intentions of my work is to help people remember just how vast and multidimensional and magnificent you really and truly are, and that your true nature is love.
Mm-hmm. And also that the true nature of everyone is love. It's really easy to get caught up in the judgment of the personality, right?
Yeah, very easy. But you can train yourself out of that. I think it takes time and some hard work. But you can get yourself in the habit of looking beyond the personality level and reminding yourself in every interaction with every person that who's really there is the Christ. There's only one being in existence in the universe, and that one being is your real true self with a capital S.
Right. So can you describe for our viewers at home who may not know the difference between past life regression, which is familiar to probably a lot of folks, but between lives is probably something that a lot of folks haven't heard of. Can you describe the difference between the two?
Well, past life is just what it sounds like. You go back to one or sometimes more than one past life. If you're shown more than one, it's usually because they're thematically related in some way. The between lives regression is a much longer, much more in-depth session. It starts with some preliminary steps to help people relax physically and mentally. And then we go into the past life portion, which, as I mentioned, is abbreviated in a between lives regression. That isn't the focus, but it's still important enough that we want to do it. Almost always somebody will be shown a past life that had a big impact on the plan for the current lifetime. They experience several different scenes in the past life, the last of which will be the death scene. The portion of their consciousness that is having the experience leaves the body in the death scene and crosses back over to the other side, which I realize might sound a little bit ominous, but there's actually nothing to it. It's very easy and gentle. When you get back to the other side, most likely you'll be greeted by a spirit guide. You'll talk briefly to the guide about why you were shown that particular past life and what's important to know about it. And then the guide will take you to your council of elders. These are the very wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution. They know literally everything about you, every past life you've had, every non-physical lifetime you've had, everything about the plan for your current lifetime. And so when you get in front of the council, they will answer any question you ask, as long as it's for your highest good to know the answer. Occasionally, someone says something like, when am I going to die? They don't want to answer a question like that for obvious reasons, but they will answer just about anything else. The most common questions people ask are, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing in terms of fulfilling my plan? And how can I better fulfill my plan? People comment frequently about the great unconditional love of the council and also total non-judgment. And they'll say things like, I could tell the council knew everything about me, including all the bad things I've done, and yet they loved me unconditionally anyway. And you know, for the average person, that's really their first experience of true unconditional love since coming into body. So it's a profound moment and really a homecoming of sorts.
Yeah, that's brilliant. How many, if you had to make an estimation based on both your experience and your research, how many lives do folks typically incarnate through in the human plane?
I think the average, as I understand it, before what we could call graduation is several hundred. But I think there are also people who will have a couple of thousand for one reason or another.
So that leads to a really great question, which is super in sort of summing up our time shortly here. What is graduation?
Graduation, as I used the word just now, means that you are leaving the cycle of reincarnation on the earth plane, and you're going off to have some entirely new kind of experience, whatever that might be that you choose to do next.
In your research, have you discovered what some of those next roles may be?
Well, a lot of people will become spirit guides to somebody else who's still incarnating on the earth plane. Some people go off and they want to do just something completely different. They'll go to a non-physical lifetime, an emotional lifetime, a mental lifetime, just exploring different forms of consciousness, basically.
Fascinating. I want to just take this quick opportunity, if we can, to talk to our viewers and let you know that I highly recommend reading Rob's books. I read Your Soul's Plan, I think, back in 2009. And I, over the years have recommended it I innumerable times to both clients and students. And so Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, Your Soul's Love, and then also experiencing a past life and between lives regression, I highly recommend for our viewers. So I want to give our viewers at home an opportunity to understand how to connect with you, Rob. So what do you have coming up?
Well, the first thing is go to the website, which is yoursoulsplan.com. click on events in the main menu, and then you'll see the whole schedule there. My wife co-teaches many of the workshops with me. She's a channel. She channels a group consciousness that we call the beings of light. So we have actually this Saturday, we're doing a one-day between lives soul regression workshop. Later in October, we have a workshop based on the higher self, bringing people into closer contact with their higher self. We have another workshop we call Star Souls. There are a lot of people incarnate now who originally come from a very far away and usually much more highly evolved civilization, and they've come here to help with the planetary ascension. We call them Star Souls. Some people call them wanderers. We have a workshop in which it helps people who are Star Souls to understand where they came from, why they came here, and what their unique gifts and abilities are, and how to actualize those in a third dimensional society. There are also a number of workshops that have translation into other languages, Polish, German, Spanish. All of that is on the events page. If you click on sessions, you can find out about doing a private between lives regression.
That's fantastic. And so given sort of today's way of communicating with one another, are these opportunities to connect with you, whether it's a between lives soul regression or if it's a workshop, are those offered virtually?
Yeah, it used to be just prior to the start of COVID that all the workshops were in person, and then that came to a screeching halt. So I moved them online, and that has actually turned out to be a wonderful thing because now we're reaching people all around the world who before couldn't get to a workshop for one reason or another. I would like eventually to get back to doing at least some in-person workshops, but at the moment, everything is still online.
Yes, super. I know the feeling. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely a pleasure to discuss with you and I'm sure very, very enlightening to our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you for having the show. I think it's a wonderful form of service to our world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you at home for tuning in to this special episode of Ghosts of Dufferin County and Beyond, and we'll see you again next time.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
When an impaired driver killed my brother DJ, some people used the A word. They called it an accident, but it wasn't. An accident implies that no one was at fault. But when someone impaired by alcohol and/or drugs chooses to drive, they are fully responsible for the crash that can result. So please, for the memory of my brother DJ and the thousands of families whose lives have been shattered by impaired drivers, let's drop the A word.
A crash caused by impaired driving is not an accident.
Hi, I'm Melinda from Move with Melinda. I am so excited. We have an 8-part fitness series out now. We're going to include stability ball training, resistance training, aerobic training, and flexibility. Right here on Rogers TV. Stay fit, stay healthy.
Send them home. Get rid of them. Gentlemen, please. And so, this organ, which I regret I cannot name because of the presence of these members of the weaker sex, who, although they are married, could not possibly endure...
Get them out.
Patience, Ginny. Patience.
Get them out!
Stop
Mrs. Trout.
There's no place for women in a medical school.
If you do not bring this classroom under control, I am going to repeat every word of this